If today were your last day on earth, where would you go? Heaven, the place of eternal light, or somewhere else, darker, deeper, filled with the screams of souls who traded truth for fame, power, and pride. In this video, you will hear the testimony of a man who survived death, a man who fell through the gates of hell, and there he saw what few dare believe the souls of Adolf Hitler, Marilyn Monroe, John Lennon, Charles Manson, even the designer of the Titanic, all being punished not because of their fame, but because of the eternal choices they once made. Do you think you're immune to such judgment? Are you sure that the words you speak today won't become chains binding your soul tomorrow? Don't look away. Stay until the final second, because every image in this video isn't just someone else's fate. It could be God's warning, meant specifically for you. And if something stirs in your spirit as you watch, hit subscribe. Turn on notifications, not because this content is entertaining, but because it might be the last call you'll ever hear before the door of destiny closes. Michael never imagined that a sudden, sharp pain in his chest would become the ticket opening the door between life and eternity. He was 56, healthy, and a man of faith. He attended church weekly. He prayed every night. He believed God would protect him. He thought that was enough. But sometimes it's the heart, the silent traitor, that brings a soul to the very edge no one expects. That Sunday afternoon, as Michael was chatting with a friend in the church parking lot, a sudden crushing pain gripped his heart. He forced a smile, tried to brush it off as simple fatigue. But before he could utter a word, his knees gave out. Everything blurred, then went black. The next time he opened his eyes, he wasn't in a hospital. He was floating above his own body, lying motionless on an operating table. Doctors rushed around, surgical lights blazed. But Michael felt nothing. His soul had left his body. Then darkness consumed him, not the peaceful kind of night, but a bottomless void that swallowed him whole. He wasn't falling. He was being dragged as if his soul was being sucked into a deep, smoky pit. The air felt like burnt oil, thick with sulfur and scorched metal. Even breathing felt like a burden. Then a voice echoed from within his soul, not in any language, but clear and absolute. This is truth. No more excuses. No more masks. Michael began to move not by choice, but as if led by some invisible force. And then he saw them. Not demons, not monstrous images, but people the world had once praised. A legendary singer, once hailed as an icon of the century, was now trapped in a maze of shattered mirrors. Each mirror didn't reflect his face, but the arrogant words he had once spoken, words that denied Christ. In the red glowing labyrinth, the voice that once moved millions could sing no more. Each proud declaration from his past now turned into lashes of fire striking his soul. There was no blood, no screams, only blackened tears dripping with untold agony. Michael stood frozen. He wanted to turn away. But the voice whispered again, "Don't just look at him. Look at yourself." His heart clenched. He remembered the careless things he'd said, the times he stayed silent in the face of truth, the jokes that planted doubt. Each one now felt like an invisible dagger piercing into his chest. Before he could recover, Michael was led to another place, a burning library. Inside, a gaunt man with weary eyes screamed in silent torment. He had once written philosophy about the death of God. Now, every line he reread from his own books ignited fire from his mouth, consuming his body, burning his very soul. Surrounding him were souls he had led astray. They said nothing. They didn't accuse. They simply stared, and in their eyes was a judgment that needed no words. Michael tried to back away, but he couldn't. Each vision struck like a blow to the heart. He now saw clearly. These weren't the evil people the world warned about. They were the ones who had used their influence to plant doubt instead of hope. The voice spoke again, this time as light as the wind, yet as heavy as stone. You were shown this not to frighten you, but to warn you. This is not their end. It is the beginning of the truth they once denied. Michael kept walking, though he wasn't sure if he moved by choice or was being led. The landscape around him began to change. The ground beneath his feet cracked open, releasing columns of thick, black smoke that rose like ashes from rotting corpses. This wasn't fire that burned from the outside. It was decay from within the soul, slow, persistent, hopeless. Ahead of him, a massive fortress began to emerge from the poisonous fog. It wasn't made of stone, but of bone, millions of human skeletons forming its walls, pillars, and windows. Every empty eye socket seemed to stare straight into his soul from deep within. Groans echoed not as sound, but as pulses of pain that struck the heart of anyone who witnessed it. The voice returned, now slow and icy. You are about to see the one who once declared himself a god, and now bows before the truth. Michael stepped into the fortress. Darkness swallowed him. The smell of ash and burning flesh filled his nose, and then He saw him, Adolf Hitler. Not the towering figure on a podium, not the uniformed man of power, but a dissolving soul, curled like a wounded animal, trembling on the ground. Around him stood thousands of silent figures. Michael recognized them immediately, victims of the gas chambers, the executions, the trains that never returned. No one screamed, no one took revenge, but their silence was heavier than any judgment, because it forced Hitler to look into every single pair of eyes, the eyes of children torn from their mothers, the elderly who fell before understanding why they had to die. Each gaze was a flame, and Hitler could not look away. He screamed, trying to crawl backward, but invisible hands dragged him forward again and again, forcing him to look. Not once, but thousands of times, each crime replayed like a film. But this time, he wasn't the director. He was the one who suffered. Michael couldn't look away. What horrified him wasn't just what Hitler had done, but something he had never considered before. A soul can suffer without end, not because of fire, but because of truth, a truth that cannot be undone. No excuses. No, I was just following orders. The voice echoed again, this time like a divine verdict. Here, there is no power, no propaganda, no rewritten history. Only truth, and truth itself is the fire that consumes him, day and night. Michael saw drops of red flame flowing from Hitler's eyes, not tears memories turned to fire. Each drop a soul that died in silence, each drop a sin melted from the inside out. Hitler screamed, but no one listened, no one came. Only the souls stood there, not judging with words, but with their very presence. They were the eternal echo of what happens when a man chooses darkness over light. Michael stepped back, his entire body shaking. He felt as if his own soul were being burned by what he had witnessed, not because he was like Hitler, but because he had once lived with the illusion that sin was merely a small moral issue. You have seen, the voice concluded like the slamming of a door, not to be afraid, but so that you will never turn away from the truth again. Michael collapsed, but he knew this journey was not over, and what awaited him next might be even more terrifying. Michael thought that after witnessing Hitler being crushed by a truth he could no longer deny, nothing else could shake his heart. But he was wrong, terribly wrong. As he stepped out of the bone fortress, the surroundings began to change. No more ashes, no more fire or blood. Before Michael, a stage appeared torn, dreamlike, as if it had once existed in a burned-out nightmare. Dark red curtains, wrinkled like dried blood, swayed gently in a poisonous breeze. Dim lights hung from above, not illuminating but glimmering like shattered eyes watching without mercy. At the center of the stage stood a large cracked mirror, surrounded by old makeup vanities, each one haunted by the ghost of a bygone glamour, now reduced to shadows. And she sat there, Marilyn Monroe. No introduction was needed. Michael recognized her instantly. But the woman before him was no longer the seductive icon of Hollywood's golden age. She was a soul trapped between fame's glow and utter loneliness. The once lustrous blonde hair was now a tangled mess of ashes, matted with dust and burnt cigarette ends. The face, once the symbol of American beauty, was cracked like shattered porcelain, leaking a dark, foul-smelling liquid that reeked of despair. She sat motionless, silently applying lipstick, her hands trembling as she tried to recreate the image the world had once adored. But each time the lipstick touched her lips, the reflection in the mirror changed no longer. Marilyn, but a gaunt phantom with hollow eyes, staring back at her, mocking, sneering, whispering, "This is who you really are." Michael held his breath. The surrounding mirrors shattered into pieces, then reformed, replaying scenes from her life. Flashes, photo shoots, applause, laughter soaked in flattery. But between those glittering moments were glimpses the world never saw: nights crying alone, pills lined on counters, eyes staring blankly at an ornate ceiling as cold as a tomb. She turned, her eyes meeting Michael's, and for a brief second, he saw that her pain wasn't punishment. It was an unanswered cry for help. Then a voice echoed, not hers, but her own voice from the past. "I don't need your God." The words sliced through the air like a cold blade, not screamed, not angry, soft, too soft. And that's what made it terrifying. A quiet rejection that had opened a door through which thousands followed, believing that light was just a myth. And then from the mirrors, souls began to emerge. Who were they? People who once admired her. Young girls who idolized her, then descended into darkness, chasing self-worth through the eyes of strangers. Those who thought outer beauty could fill the aching void in their hearts. These souls did not blame her with words, but with every step closer. An invisible cord wrapped tighter around her body. Michael saw bony hands reach out from within the mirrors, pulling Marilyn into the shattered glass. Each time she was dragged into a reflection, her body distorted, melting, warping, her eyes turning into black voids that swallowed all light. Then she reappeared to repeat it all again. She didn't scream. but her lips trembled, as if her soul were crying out from within. "Please, let me escape this role." Michael choked back tears. He felt that the pain he witnessed wasn't just Marilyn's. It belonged to anyone who had ever lived a life trying to please the world, and lost their soul in the process. The familiar voice returned, this time close, as if whispering directly into his ear. "The mask she wore has become her chains. The spotlight she once craved has become a darkness with no exit." Michael stepped back, not out of fear of her, but because he saw himself in that reflection. He remembered the times he too had faked a smile just to be accepted. The parties, the jokes mocking faith, so he wouldn't be labeled old-fashioned. And he asked himself, if I had died last night, am I sure I haven't worn a mask my whole life? Marilyn was still being dragged away, her hands reaching into the air, trying to grasp something, anything. A final mirror appeared before her, and in it, not her reflection, but the face of Jesus Christ. His eyes were gentle, sorrowful, without judgment. But Marilyn turned away, unable to bear his gaze. The mirror shattered. Her soul reappeared, seated again at the vanity. Again, applying lipstick. And again, it began. The cycle continued. Michael walked off the stage. The red curtain fell behind him. But the whispers of that soul and all those who had chased after false light lingered in his heart. He understood now hell isn't a place where demons scream. It's where souls are left alone with themselves, trapped in the consequences of choices they once thought were no big deal. The voice spoke again, softly as, "Is the space of truth. Each soul will dwell forever in the reality they chose. Keep going. Michael, there is more you must see." Michael nodded, though his legs felt like they had no strength left, and deep within him, his own voice whispered, "Lord, please don't let me return and forget any of this." He left the dark stage where Marilyn Monroe was eternally trapped in the image the world once worshipped. He thought he'd be given a moment to rest, but in this place, the truth doesn't allow souls to rest. Every time he thought he had reached the deepest level of hell, the next gate would open deeper, heavier, and even more real. The atmosphere around him shifted again. The space grew damp, putrid, and decayed like a forest cursed by demons. On the ground, tree roots curled like the tendons of a dead man's hand, snaking across every surface. The towering trees bore no leaves, just columns of bone stretching toward the sky, as if crying out in silent agony. There was no light, only a mouldy greyness that clung to everything like the dust of rotting souls. Michael realized he was now standing in a forest where life no longer existed. The wind howled through the dead branches, and the sound it made was like children crying. From the distance, a deep voice echoed, not loud but amplified, as if carried by hundreds of souls. Drink and be freed. Michael followed the voice. His heart already knew what was waiting. And then in a clearing between the trees he saw a man standing, holding a rusted metal cup filled with a dark, foul-smelling liquid, like a corpse steeped in poison. It was Jim Jones. Michael recognized the face instantly, the man whose eyes once burned with fanatic fire as the delusional religious leader. Now, those eyes were gone. Only 2 empty sockets remained, caked with dried blood and despair. Surrounding him were hundreds of other souls, former followers, those who once called him Father, who had entrusted him with their souls in blind faith. They approached him, no screaming, no accusations, but each silently handed him a cup identical to the one in his hand and forced him to drink. Once, then again, and again, for eternity. Jim Jones trembled, pleading, mumbling something that sounded like a prayer, but his words did not rise to heaven. Instead, they transformed into small, black, slippery snakes that slithered back down his throat, choking him, making him cough and gag. The snakes didn't bite. They crawled inward, shattering his vocal cords and then burrowing deep into his soul, clawing at him from the inside out. Michael couldn't move. He stood there, frozen, witnessing the reenactment of one of the most horrific tragedies of the 20th century. But here, there were no historical records, no headlines, only the raw, naked essence of sin. The voice, cold as molten iron, spoke again. He is not punished merely for murder, but for doing it in my name. Michael felt his hands go cold. This was not an ordinary criminal. Jim Jones was a man who had borrowed the language of light to lead others into darkness. The sweet sermons, the tearful prayers, the hymns he once used to inspire faith now echoed through the forest, distorted and ghastly, like the laughter of demons. The souls of his former followers began to sing. It was the same song they once sang when following him, but now every word sliced into Jim Jones's flesh like a blade. Blood poured from his ears, his mouth, his eyes like rivers, but he couldn't die. His body dissolved, only to reform, so that the cycle could continue. Forced to drink, forced to hear the cursed hymn, forced to scream in silence. Michael wanted to cry out, to weep, to beg someone to stop. But deep in his soul, he knew this was justice. Not because God delights in punishment, but because every soul must face the full consequence of what it chose to believe. Jim Jones was not bound in chains, but his own words were the strongest chains of all. The sermons he once preached had become curses. Every word he ever spoke about heaven, deliverance, and love now pushed him deeper into a bottomless abyss. The voice whispered again, like a faint bell echoing through the night. Faith is a sacred gift, but when perverted, it becomes a double-edged sword, destroying both the preacher and the believer. Michael bowed his head. He thought about all the prayer meetings he had attended, the times he had heard the word, but let his mind drift to trivial things. He thought of how often he had treated salvation as a given, and now before his very eyes he saw a living warning. Faith is not merely a choice. It is a holy responsibility. Jim Jones collapsed, black foam spilling from his mouth, still clinging tightly to the rusted cup, as if it were the last thing he had left to hold on to. The souls kept coming, kept offering the cup, kept singing the song that never ended. Michael stepped back. The darkness of the forest seemed to reach for him, but this time, he wasn't afraid. He was awake. As he stepped out of that rotting forest, one question echoed through his mind. If I live for truth, who is the one I'm truly following? Michael had just emerged from the decayed woods where Jim Jones was eternally tormented by the souls who had once called him Father. He thought he might finally catch his breath. But no, the darkness was not finished. The journey was not over. The atmosphere shifted once again from damp rot to bone-chilling cold. His breath turned to white mist, dissolving before his eyes, as if the air itself rejected the presence of life. Each step felt heavier, as though he were walking across a thin sheet of ice over an endless chasm. He was entering the frozen hell. This was not the kind of cold one feels on a winter day. It didn't just make the body tremble. It froze the soul. There was no fire here, but it was still hell, a different kind, quieter, more merciless. Before Michael, a vast white field stretched out, but it wasn't snow. It was frozen ash, covering a land of death. Each speck of ash seemed to carry the soul of a person erased from history, still crying out in silence. In the middle of that frozen wasteland, Michael saw a massive structure. It wasn't a castle, more like a Soviet-era prison. Its walls weren't built from stone or brick, but from thousands of frozen human bodies, fused together, mouths agape, eyes wide open. Yet no breath remained. They had been turned into the very foundation of one man's dream for power. At the center, seated on a throne made of white bone and rusted iron, sat a soul, Joseph Stalin. Gone was the commanding aura of the leader who once made nations tremble. Before Michael was a gray, stiff shadow, head bowed, bound by black chains crusted with snow and frost. But the chains didn't come from outside, they grew from within him, from his chest, his shoulders, his mouth, as if every word spoken, every decision made, every execution signed had become a link that now bound his soul. A voice, sharp as broken steel, rang in Michael's mind. This is the sentence of one who used ideals to reject God. Michael stepped closer. Stalin opened his eyes. Those eyes, once enough to strike terror into millions, were now empty. Frozen from within. No more fury, only deep confusion, as if even he could no longer understand why his soul remained chained in this place. Then, the souls began to appear, silent, numerous, like Russian snow. They didn't scream. They didn't cry. They just stood there, watching him. They were the victims of purges, gulags, and the system that had crushed both faith and humanity. Each held a length of cold, glowing chain, and one by one, they wrapped those chains around Stalin, not in anger, but in solemn recognition. I don't hate you, but I was never allowed to truly live because of you. Michael could feel it. This wasn't revenge. It was reckoning. No more ideologies, no more excuses, only truth, cold, sharp, and undeniable. Stalin began to tremble. He tried to speak, but each word that left his mouth turned to shards of ice, falling and shattering on the frozen ground, as if his voice no longer held meaning in eternity. A man stepped out from the crowd, dressed in a prison uniform. His arms were broken, his body gaunt. He didn't accuse. He simply placed a hand on Stalin's chest and said quietly, "You replaced God with yourself. Now you must face yourself." Instantly, the chains tightened. Stalin screamed, not in pain, but in realization there was no escape. No army, no propaganda, no political spotlight. He stood stripped bare, with nothing left but every wrong decision turned into a judgment. Michael stepped back. He had never felt so cold, even with no wind. This cold wasn't from weather, it came from being cut off from the love of God. The voice spoke again. "There is no fire here, but this is hell, for the absence of light is darkness. Michael collapsed, tears brimming in his eyes, not because he pitied Stalin, but because he too had once lived as if he were the master of his own life. If we do not worship God, we will worship ourselves, and that is the beginning of every abyss. Before leaving that frozen land, Michael turned for one last look. Stalin was still there, not vanished, not destroyed, still bound, still watched, still unable to escape himself. Michael walked away, carrying only one prayer in his heart, Lord. Please don't let me live as if you don't exist. After Stalin, after the soundless screams echoing between the icy souls, everything stopped. There was no next step. No gate opened. No voice spoke. Only silence. So vast, it felt like even the universe had gone still. Michael stood there, not knowing where he was. No pain, no fear, just emptiness, but the kind of emptiness God prepares when He's about to fill it with something new. And then the light came, not blinding, not violent, but warm like the first smile after a long, bitter winter. Michael didn't feel himself being taken away, but he knew he was being brought back. A doctor's voice echoed faintly, mingling with the soft beep of a monitor. He's got a pulse. Michael opened his eyes. No demons, no mirrors, no fire, only the surgical lights above, and the astonished eyes of those trying to keep him alive. He had returned, but he was no longer the same man. In the days that followed, Michael said nothing, not because he had lost his mind, but because every word now felt sacred, heavier than stone, if not spoken in truth. People thought he was traumatized by a near-death experience. Some doctors called it a hallucination. Family worried. Friends asked questions. But Michael knew he had seen. It was real, undeniable, unexplainable, and above all, impossible to remain silent about. He started again from zero, not in terms of career or possessions, but faith. The man who once went to church every Sunday now wept like a child at every Mass. He no longer attended out of habit, but for survival. He didn't read the Bible out of duty, but as if every verse was a life or death letter from God written just for him. Michael didn't preach, didn't shout, didn't condemn anyone. He simply shared his story through his eyes, his voice, and the most powerful witness of all, a completely transformed life. People began to ask, "Why do you forgive so easily? Why don't you get angry like you used to? Why do you cry whenever someone mocks God?" Michael answered with just one sentence. "Because I've seen what happens when people think God isn't real." He began visiting prisons, hospitals, rehab centers, places he used to avoid. He never used religion to judge. He simply told the truth about hell and about mercy. He told of Marilyn, the woman once bathed in spotlight, yet desperately lonely in her soul. He told of Jim Jones, who used God's name for personal gain, and was swallowed by his own words. He told of Stalin, who thought himself a god, and is now frozen forever in the darkness he built. But he didn't stop at horror. He said, "I also saw the light. I saw him an angel standing beside me in the final hour." And he didn't ask me what I had accomplished. He only asked, "Do you love me? Are you willing to live truthfully so that others won't end up where you've been?" From that moment, Michael lived with a clear mission to warn, but never instill fear, to awaken, but never accuse, to live truthfully, but always guide others toward grace. One day, a young man asked Michael, "If hell is really that terrible, why would God give people the freedom to go there?" Michael smiled, not sadly, not bitterly, just a gentle smile from someone who had stood in the place no one ever wants to see. He answered, "Because love can't be forced. If God didn't give us free will, then our faith would be nothing more than reflex. But because we have freedom, our love for Him means something. And because of that love, I choose to live differently. So no one has to step into the place I once saw." Years passed. Michael's story spread not through social media, but through his living testimony. People didn't remember every detail he told, but everyone who met him said the same thing. "When I'm near him, I want to return to God." And that was the miracle, not because Michael was a saint, but because Michael had died and come back with a heart no longer belonging to this world.